Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Michael Redliner. I'm an EMS and emergency physician, and I also serve as the president of the board of the National EMS Quality Alliance. I'm very excited today to announce the launch of the new National EMS Quality Alliance measures that are coming out this year for use in the EMS community and context around the country. So I'm joined by Jeff Jarvis, who will introduce himself a little bit later on. He's the chair of the Measure Development Committee, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the background of NEMSQA and a lot about the new measures that we've released today. It's a full range of measures that we are excited to announce. They come from all different aspects of emergency medical services. We're talking about airway and trauma. We're talking about all sorts of important measures that will help to guide folks when they think about developing a quality program and improving the quality of the care that they provide. So for a brief overview and outline of what we're going to do today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what NEMSQA is. I'm going to talk about the measure development process. We're going to talk about what measure endorsement means. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's happened over the last couple of years related to the measure endorsement cycle. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the overview of the new NEMSQA measures. So, and then we'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about resources and what's next for NEMSQA. So who is NEMSQA and what do we do? Really, at the end of the day, our job is to provide measurable ways for EMS systems to pursue improvement, improve patient outcomes, and provider safety. We collaboratively develop and test evidence-based quality measures so that we can have tools and resources for EMS to do the work that they do every day. Why does NEMSQA matter to this effort and the new measures that we're talking about today? Really, NEMSQA leads stakeholders to focus on measuring what matters and provide tools to make that happen. NEMSQA quality measures operationalize treatment guidelines and best practices through the use of evidence-based performance measures. EMS practitioners and leaders have common goals, providing the best care to patients and the best service to their communities. By measuring performance, leaders will know how to identify successes and areas for growth. EMS has worked since 2003 to standardize and improve data collection systems through the National EMS Information System, or NEMSIS, and partnering with NEMSIS allows NEMSQA to provide a path that puts data to use in a meaningful way to help EMS providers better serve patients and communities. Over the course of the last 8 years, we have been working as an EMS community to organize quality measures for use by EMS. NHTSA has been a lead organization that's kind of put this on the map, and we've benefited from the work that the foundational work that's been done through EMS measure development initiatives throughout in the country. Since 2017, the EMS community, working with support from the federal government, has looked to develop standardized quality measures for EMS. Over the course of the last 8 years, we have been working together as a community to do this work. And in 2019, the National EMS Quality Alliance was founded, benefiting from foundational work from the EMS Compass Project. We released the first EMS measure set, which came out as Compass 2.0, but now is known as the National EMS Quality Alliance measures, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then since that time, we've been working to roll out these national EMS measure sets across the country, working with both local community groups, states, and the federal government, as well as others, to think about what will best fit the patients that we serve and the providers that we work with on the front line to make sure that they have the tools to improve care for patients. So in 2021, we updated our membership structure. We started to work on a specific national quality improvement project on improving the safety and decreasing the use of lights and sirens. And we've been continuing to work on many of these projects through the last several years, including measure development efforts like the field triage guideline measure development with the American College of Surgeons, and the FAIR project, which we'll discuss in just a moment. And now in 2023, here we are. We are ready to release this new set of quality measures that we think will be of an incredible importance to the EMS community. And along with other initiatives to support the use and the implementation of evidence-based measures, we'll work with partners across the industry to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the community. For all of you who are seeing this, you should know or should be aware of the National EMS Quality Alliance measures that currently exist, right? A broad range of measures that we've been talking about and discussing over the last few years that really have helped to guide and shape some of the quality work that's going on through the country, and really are a tool for agencies and organizations to use now. And we hope to, again, what we're doing today is really going to release the second set of measures that will build on the success of these quality measures. So we have been busy, and as I discussed in the prior slide, we've been working to develop quality measures over the last several years. We've done some very successful work with the Florida Department of Health, looking at the FAIR Measure Development Project, where we developed 56 measures, including stratifications, in a full range of topics, some of which we'll discuss today, which will be part of the new national set, and we're very happy to partner with them. Again, with the American College of Surgeons, we've looked at and helped support the development of the measures that support the rollout of the new field triage guidelines for injured patients. And with NASEMSO, we've looked at the airway, the pre-hospital airway management evidence-based guideline measure development. And all of those are contributing to what you're seeing today. So we really appreciate our partnerships, and we look forward to working with our partners as we continue to roll these out and to help the EMS community use these measures in a successful way in support of the care of our patients. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jeff Jarvis, who is the real expert when it comes to measure development, and he's going to take us through a lot of the details about the new measures and how we got to where we are today. So, Jeff, thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks a lot, Michael. I am really, really excited to be here and to go over this information. As Michael said, this is something we've been working on for years now, and being able to share this information with you just makes me so happy. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the process we used to develop measures, and then we'll get into the meat of the measures themselves. So this is the process that we use when we go through and develop measures, and you'll see there are multiple components of it. The first part starts with a measure concept or a topic, and we will get these either from other organizations or develop them internally. We will take a look at those measures and try to identify whether these measures exist somewhere else or we need to develop them internally. If they exist somewhere else, we will refer them over to our measure endorsement process. And if we need to develop them internally, then we go through a process for prioritizing which measures we want. As you can imagine, there are way more measure concepts that we would love to develop than there are time and resources with which to develop them. And that's where the prioritization of measure concepts comes in. We use a different variety of things after assuring that we have the resources we need to develop these. Then we will go through a Delphi approach, which is an approach to building consensus with large groups of subject matter experts to try to take all of the measure concepts that we like and rank them based on a variety of factors. And we will go through some of those factors in a little bit to show you the process that we went through. Once we decide we need to develop internal measures, we run these through a process that starts with building out the rationale for the measure. In other words, why is this measure clinically relevant? Then we will work with those measures to identify where the data is going to come from. If you ain't got no data, you ain't got no measure. So we have to figure out where the data is going to come from. We will build pseudocode, which is just the way of mapping our measures to the data source and putting it into a language that all people doing measures can understand. And the whole reason for doing that is to compare apples to apples. We really need to be very painfully specific about what we're measuring. And this is the process that we use to develop that. Then we'll go through testing where we essentially take these measures and apply them to large data sets. Clearly, the largest out there is NEMSIS. We look at NEMSIS data. We will run the measures and generate a bunch of statistics on how they perform, and then use those statistics in a review process to determine whether we need to tweak the measures or whether they're performing well enough to go for final review. All right, so with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about measure endorsement. Measure endorsement is the process where we take measures that are developed by other organizations. One notable example here is Florida. So Florida had the FAIR project. They contracted with us to build out 56 specific measures. So we went through that entire process we just discussed with the FAIR measures. And then we brought it back in because technically that is an external measure. And we went through the endorsement process. And this is something that we go through to essentially avoid reinventing the wheel. If somebody else has already built a good, strong measure that meets the needs of our organization, then we will approach the owner of that measure and look to how we can endorse them. When it comes to evaluating a measure concept, so for example, we have a bunch of suggestions about measures that we need. These are topic areas. We run them through a formal evaluation that looks at different topic areas. So we get subject matter experts to evaluate them on these concepts, these topics or themes. And number one is, what is the clinical value? We don't want to measure something that doesn't matter. There are lots of measures out there to say, well, what is the mean tire pressure of the left front ambulance tire? That's a great measure for something other than NEMSQA. So that's not something that's going to have a huge clinical impact. And yes, I hear my operations guy saying, well, you're not going to be taking care of people with flat tires. I get that, but that's not in the realm of NEMSQA. So we look at the clinical impact. And then we evaluate the evidence that is there to support that measure. And when possible, we lean heavily on our partner organizations, that specifically the Guidelines Consortium that has already formally done this. So we look at the evidence. We also look at the feasibility. In other words, does the data exist for us to measure? This is a wonderful concept, but we don't have the data to examine it. Therefore, it's not a feasible measure. We might put it in a parking lot to come back to if we get additional data in the future. And then the final thing we evaluated on is face validity. If you look at this measure on its face, does it make sense? The average person who sees this, say in an article on EMS 1, well, they go, oh yeah, I can see how that doing well on that measure would be a reflection of good quality care. So those are the key concepts that we look at. And then we finalize them by saying, well, how much work will go into doing this? And if this is an endorsement process, how well can we work with the owner to get agreement to move forward with this within a reasonable amount of time? So to give you an idea of the endorsement cycle that we've been going through, largely since we did the FAIR measures and since we put out a call for additional topics, we went through and did the scoping review. What was out there? We came up with 174 different existing measures from federal, state, regional, and industry partners. In the fall of 2021, we went through the first round of evaluating those. As you can imagine, there are a lot of duplicate measures because so far there hasn't been a lot of coordination between different organizations building out measures. So we wanted to consolidate those. And what we identified from the 174 was 38 unique concepts. We went through a second round where we graded them based on the criteria that we had just talked about. And then we gave them a letter grade, A, B, or C. And from there, we ended up with 26 different A measures. Then we took those A measures and prioritized them based on the criteria we looked at to try to identify the ones that are ready to go right now. And we ended up with 11 of those. We sent that to the board. The board considered it and ended up voting to approve 10 measures. And then we have worked with the owners of those measures and said, hey, let's work something out here. We think these are wonderful measures and we want to work an agreement out. We've reached that agreement, and now we have published those measures that we're just about to tell you about. This is the exciting stuff. As you can see, at least 2 years of work, and when you add FAIR into that, we've been working on these measures for 3 years. We've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in them, and we're really excited to show you what we got. And here are the measures. We're going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail, but these are the 10 measures that we have endorsed from the, or approved with the board and then endorsed. So these are some really exciting measures. With that, let's just jump into them. Now, one thing to know is you will not see any pediatric measures in there. And that is not because we don't value the care that we give to pediatric patients. Obviously we do. It's because now every measure is an adult measure and a pediatric measure. And the way we do that is we stratify these measures by age. And the cutoff point we use is 18 years of age or older. So for every measure, and this goes along for the existing measures and the ones that we just released, you will actually see a stratification. This is how we perform on the adults. This is how we perform on the non-adults, the pediatric patients. All right, let's get into them. I'm an airway nerd, love me some airway measures. This is the one that I am really the most excited about. I will also tell you, this is one of the most technical measures to measure and then to really nail as an EMS agency. So this is Airway 01, and it is a successful first advanced airway placement without hypoxia or hypotension. This is a measure that is also called -1A, or definitive airway sans hypoxia in one attempt. So for each one of these measures, I want to go through and give you the denominator and the numerator. So all of these measures are designed to give you a proportion of an initial population that meets certain criteria, and all of them are structured so that a higher proportion equates to better performance on the measure. And again, all of these are stratified by adult and pediatric patients, and some of these measures have additional stratification. For example, this measure also stratifies not only by adults and kids, but by the type of device. So we're looking at endotracheal intubation, and we're looking at supraglottic intubation. And then the third category is all advanced airways. All right, so the denominator is the first advanced airway procedure or invasive airway that was done in which you had pulse ox data and blood pressure documented from the period of time 5 minutes before to 5 minutes after the actual placement of the invasive airway. So the initial population, all patients who had an invasive airway placed, and have data 5 minutes before placement, 5 minutes after. This measure specifically excludes patients in cardiac arrest, because kind of by definition, they're going to be hypotensive. So this is just the non-arrest patients. And then the numerator is the proportion of patients that were successful on that first attempt without hypoxia or hypotension. Hypoxia was defined as under 90%, hypotension under 100 millimeters of mercury, that is. So that is Airway 01. Very exciting stuff. Airway 05 is adequate oxygenation before endotracheal intubation. This one is not stratified by the type of invasive airway. It is limited to just endotracheal intubation. It also excludes cardiac arrest. And the denominator here is everybody with an intubation attempted. And then the numerator is those who were adequately pre-oxygenated with an oxygen saturation of 94 or above. Another way of saying that is greater than 93 for the 5 minutes prior to the intubation. Now, y'all understand the clinical rationale for this is that we know that peri-intubation hypoxia is dangerous. Intubating increases the odds of hypoxia. To decrease that, we need to adequately pre-oxygenate and denitrogenate the patient, and having an adequate oxygen saturation above 93 for that 5 minute period increases the likelihood of that. So that's the rationale. This is, did we adequately pre-oxygenate? That is airway 05. Airway 18. This is, did we use waveform capnography, which is the standard of care for endotracheal and supraglottic airway placements, I might add. Did we use waveform capnography for monitoring? And our denominator is patients that had a successful invasive or advanced airway placed. We're not excluding anybody from this, including cardiac arrest. We specifically want them to use waveform in cardiac arrest. So all successful airways, the numerator is those who used waveform capnography for confirmation and monitoring. We know that there are substantial dislodgements and misplacements of airways after initial placement. And this is the reason we're looking not just at confirmation, but at monitoring. That's airway 18. Moving on from airway, this is a broader topic. This is not just patients who've had an invasive airway. This is all patients. And what we're looking at here is a denominator of patients older than 1 day. So we're excluding the neonates because their molecules work a little bit differently. They come from the factory initially hypoxic. And it's very challenging to get the age and number of hours. So our pediatrics and neonatology colleagues recommended we just look at over 24 hours where the physiology should have normalized by that point. So we're looking at all patients with hypoxia. That is a low sat under 90%. And our numerator is just those patients that we gave oxygen to. So this should be something I would hope that the nation is going to perform really well on. You found them hypoxic. Did you do something about that? Did you give them some oxygen? That's respiratory O2. Syncope. Syncope 01, we're looking at all patients with a primary or secondary impression of syncope who had a 12-lead ECG performed. And specifically, if they did a 15-lead, that would count also. So we're looking here, syncopal patients who had a 12-lead. This is one of the, it's honestly just a board review question. If you syncopize, you need a 12-lead. We're looking for cardiovascular causes of that. Syncope 01. Next, we have a TTR measure. TTR stands for triage, treat, and release. And what we're looking for here is of patients that EMS assessed from a 911 call, but did not transport. So these are the refusals. That's our denominator. Now, we did exclude cardiac arrest because a lot of cardiac arrest end up not being transported. That's not the population we're looking at here. So denominator, patients that were not transported. The numerator is just those that had a full set of vital signs documented. Systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, SpO2, respiratory rate, and some marker for mental status, GCS or AVPU. We have two existing safety measures that we used as the foundation for the first ever national quality improvement process. That was Safety 01, Safety 02, looking at the use or the safe response to scene and transport, the proportion without lights and sirens. But we're adding another safety measure, This one is specific to pediatrics by nature of the measure, and we're looking at children under 8 years old who are restrained in some type of restraint device. So basically, we want to know, did you have a kid and were they in a kid seat? So our denominator, under 8 years old, we do have some exclusions here for things that I think make sense. They're over 8, the idea being that they're probably at that age either past the legal limit or they just don't fit in the devices anymore. They are otherwise immobilized, severe trauma, active airway management going on, or cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest is probably a little challenging to work in a car seat. So we excluded those. The numerator then is they were transported in a car seat. And there is a NEMSQA value that helps us look at this. Now on to an additional trauma measure. This is the proportion of patients with trauma, and we get that trauma from a NEMSQA value saying, were they injured or not? So all patients who were injured with trauma, the numerator is those that had a GCS, respiratory rate, and SPP documented. Trauma 14, this is one that we are looking for the patients that are significantly injured. And specifically, we're using the CDC ACS criteria to identify patients who met either the step 1 or step 2 criteria. And we're using the new criteria here, the ones that heavily look at anatomic and physiologic criteria. So if they met step 1 or 2 of those trauma triage guidelines, they're in the denominator. The numerator is those patients that had a trauma alert, some pre-arrival alert notification done. That's trauma 14. So TBI 01, this is looking at whether we assessed and documented vital signs in patients with traumatic brain injury. So this comes from the work of Dr. Spate and Babra with the EPIC trial in Arizona, where he found that episodes of blood pressure lowering, so hypotension or hypoxia or hyperventilation, have a direct impact on outcomes of patients. So this measure is aimed at saying, did we document it? Now, clearly, whether we document it or not is a precursor to we do something about it, and that is a measure that's in our parking lot. So of those patients with a suspected TBI, we want to know, did we get pulse ox, end-tidal CO2, and blood pressure? This is a look at our new website that shows all of the new measures that we have. Just like our existing measures, if you want details about the measure specification, the measure pseudocode, here's the place to go. So go to our website, log in, you have full access to all of the technical resources. And I am really, really excited that now this reflects all of the additional hard work of the committees, the boards, all of the organizations that have worked together to create this. And what I'm going to do now is close with what's next. So now that we've done this, our initial round of expansion, what we really want to get to is the concept we've had all along. We want to take a handoff from our colleagues at the Pre-Hospital Guideline Consortium who specialize in evaluating the evidence and evaluating guidelines. They have identified measures that or concepts, guidelines, that have great evidentiary support for that need to be developed into measures. They take that, hand it off to us, and then we feed that into our measure development process. That's the next step. And then once we have been doing that, we will also send out additional calls for new measure development. So those are the measures that we have. Really, really exciting stuff. When you work on something for a long time, you just get so pumped to see everybody's response. That's where we are right now. Guys, I hope these measures really help you improve your performance in your local agency. Now, we went over these measures really quick, and you may have noticed that there wasn't a lot of detail. Fear not, the great folks at Prodigy have partnered with us. We're going to do additional webinars on each of these measures where we really get into the nerd talk about how to measure these and how to implement them, and most importantly, how to improve on them. And with that, I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. Thanks, y'all.